Thank you. Thank you very much. You know, it's tax time, and so I've been thinking a lot about my wedding day. It was just 2 years ago in August, and we were in Burlington on what was the most beautiful day. Our wedding was at the Quaker Meeting House, and the flowers were in bloom, and the weather was perfect. And as my father walked me down the aisle, we were surrounded by my closest friends, my family. My niece was the flower girl, my nephew was the ring bearer. It was a gorgeous, gorgeous day. My mother-in-law, when we had told her 6 months earlier that we were going to get married, she sprung into action. She was fantastic. I don't think a wedding has ever been planned as swiftly. Cake, caterer, location. And even though my fiance and I were head over heels, we said, you know what, we're going to be reasonable people. We're not going to, you know, lose our minds. I didn't want to be a bridezilla. So we said, we're going to keep this thing affordable. It'll be an intimate gathering. And we both made that commitment. So I'm not sure how we got from that modest assessment of what our wedding would be like to deciding, yes, we actually do need to rent the top deck of the Spirit of Ethan Allen for the Sunshine Cruise of Lake Champlain. But I'm very glad that we did, because it really was just an absolutely perfect way to end the best day of my life. And of the hundreds of pictures that were taken that day, the one that really, for me, captures the joy and the excitement of entering this new married chapter of my life with my wife, Andrea, is this one that I can't get. So I'll tell you about it. Here we were emerging from the clearing right after the wedding ceremony, and we were just so thrilled. And I love to say, my wife, Andrea. I love to say it. I love to say it because as a gay person, the nomenclature has always been a challenge. It's, you know, girlfriend sounds too juvenile, right? What are the others? Life partner sounds very formal. Significant other sounds clinical, right? And then you've got lover that just sounds too much, too European. But wife, spouse, you know, husband, these words, they have pretty near universal meaning. When you hear somebody introduce their spouse, you know right away that this is the person who is most dear. This is the person who has that special permanent place in your heart and in your life. And yet, where and when I declare Andrea as my wife places me in jeopardy. Now, I'm not talking about physical jeopardy, even though gay people more often experience the hate crimes. And when hate crimes are inflicted, they're usually in the most violent category. But I'm not talking about that. And I'm not even talking about economic discrimination, because it's significant. As a matter of fact, the New York Times did a study that calculated essentially that compared to their heterosexual counterparts, gay couples could expect to basically be docked almost more than $450,000 in their lifetime in taxes, benefits that we do not get. So it's significant, but I'm not actually talking about that. I'm talking about actual legal jeopardy. So it's tax time, and I'm thinking about my wedding because the form that the government provides us to fill out at tax time requires, under penalty of perjury, that we identify our marital status. But if I check that box as married, and this is my wedding certificate, my marriage certificate, if I check that box and say, yes, I am married, the federal government says that I can face penalties, criminal penalties, financial penalties, for stating what is simply true about my life. It's a circumstance that tens of thousands of legally married gay people face every tax season. Since, in Massachusetts became the first state where gay people could marry. But since then, all across our country and all across the world, gay people have been marrying in jurisdictions and countries. And what it presents is the choice that you have to make between telling the truth or following the law. And it's even more complicated than that. There was recently a report on a campaign that we launched called Refusal to Lie. Because what we realized was there were lots of people in the same situation that Andrea and I were facing. The very first time as a legally married couple, we were facing that document and trying to decide what we were going to do. And thinking back on that amazing day, we could not conclude that we would take an action that would erase it, that would call that day a lie. And this is a conversation that we've been having with people across the country, and increasingly, people are making that same decision because it is a lie to say that I'm not married. And the reason the government wants to compel me to mark single is because the government wants to discriminate without getting its hands dirty. The Congress passed a law called Defense of Marriage Act. And basically the Defense of Marriage Act says that while I may be legally married in Vermont, in Massachusetts, in Iowa, in South Africa, in Canada, in Mexico, in Argentina, in the Netherlands, and Belgium, all across the country, I actually have to check my longitude and latitude to know which rights I have at any given moment. But the government says we aren't going to recognize you, so you have to erase your spouse. You have to make your family invisible. And oftentimes when we talk about the marriage issue, there's a number that comes up. It's called 1,138. It's the number of rights that automatically accrue when people get married. Now, most people in here who are married probably couldn't recite those 1,138 rights. If you can, raise your hand, let me know. But you don't have to. You don't have to think about it. There is power in the word marriage because it is a commonly understood way of telling who somebody is to you. And with that word comes a kind of power. If you rush to the emergency room and say my significant other is in there, you might get in. My wife, people don't say, wait a second, let me see your marriage certificate. Let me see your power of attorney. Let me see these documents that give you authorization. It's a universally understood way of communicating the urgency of you being there by their bedside, holding their hand at the most desperate hour. That's why the word matters. The rights are important. But in Burlington, on that August day in summer, I wasn't thinking about 1,138 rights. I was thinking about this person, this amazing person who has agreed to take this journey with me, this life with me, that we made this vow that we would care for each other in sickness and in health, in good times and bad, for richer and definitely for poor. That's why we got married. And it is one thing to deny those 1,138 legal protections that make it harder for me to take care of my loved one, to take care of my family. But it's another to add insult to that injury and to tell me I have to erase her. I have to sign a document, swear that it's the truth, and put my name on it. So across the country, the tens of thousands of legally married gay people are saying we're not willing to do this anymore. Now, it's not something that everyone's going to do. The reality is that we don't know what the legal ramifications will be. If you go to a tax preparer, we've actually heard of tax preparers firing their gay clients because the laws are too Byzantine and unfathomable. And the New York Times actually contacted the IRS to ask them to explain more clearly what would happen to gay couples who did this. And they said, we can't tell you really, and we're not going to clarify. So I liken it to being blindfolded and put on a tightrope and you don't know whether it's 4 inches off the ground or 400 feet. But I do know that there are more and more people willing to risk whatever that risk might be. We are refusing to lie. And that's the name of the campaign that a small network of grassroots people just launched, refusetolie.org. And we think of it in part a call to action, but we realize that there are a lot of people who can't do this. A good friend of mine, Kate Kendall, and her wife, they're going to actually pay $5,000 more for the ability to mark the box correctly as married. It's not about money. It's not about those rights. It's about the self-respect of being able to say those words and never violate those vows. So refusetolie.org has become a place where people can share their stories. And the amazing thing to me is not only the people who tell their stories and say, you know what, I've had enough, I'm not going to mark a box that erases my family. It's also the people who say, you know what, I wish I could, but I'm not ready to take that step. But I'm not going to ignore any longer the knife in the gut that comes to me when I face those choices. Now, tax day is an obvious one, but there are other places. I know of a gay couple who went on their honeymoon, and when they returned, if anyone's been through customs, if you're a family, you get to fill out one form. If you're not family, you have to fill out separate forms and go up individually. And this couple, returning from their honeymoon, filled with all of the joys that you would expect newly married people returning from a great time away would feel, and to be hit with the indignity of being told you are not family. You must fill out separate forms. You cannot approach this podium together. You cannot claim your spouse at this moment. You know, there's a famous quote, and I can't tell you what it is word for word, but the essence of it is this, that when great injustices rise before us, it is a shared experience, and we rise together to fight it. But when these daily indignities, this death by 1,000 cuts occur, individually they don't provoke that same kind of outrage, and we begin to accommodate them, and we begin to accept them and numb ourselves to the offense of them. I grew up in a part of Florida called, it's Panama City. It's affectionately known as the Redneck Riviera, a badge of honor by folks who live there. And when I played basketball in high school, our bus would roll through a particular neighborhood, and the black children on the bus, students on the bus, we were told to slide down in our chairs, in our seats, because in this part of town, a black face in the window might actually get shot at. Now, I remember thinking, why do we have to accommodate their prejudice? You know, shouldn't we have police escorts? Shouldn't something be done about it? And I could talk to my family, and I could talk to other players, and I could talk to African American teachers. I had a network of support. But when those same kinds of things happened about gay people, when anti-gay slurs were hurled in my school, they were as likely to come from a teacher as from a student, and there was no place to turn. Those messages get internalized in ways that allow us to just begin to think, well, this isn't ideal, but I can live with it. My wife and I had dinner in downtown St. Petersburg, and we were leaving a restaurant holding hands. It was a great night. And we were window shopping at a little art store downtown, and we heard the sort of boisterous noise of young men making their way, perhaps drunkenly, up the sidewalk. And I remember Andrea stopped holding my hand to point to something in the window, and when she brought her hand back down, she didn't take mine. And I remember thinking, this happens a lot, and I'm noticing it for the first time right now. And the other thing I thought was, I'm so relieved she didn't take my hand. Because what it meant was I didn't have to confront what was happening psychologically for us, which was we were suddenly, this beautiful night was suddenly a night of fear. We are disproportionately the target of hate violence, and when we are the target, it is disproportionately in the most violent categories. But we numb ourselves to it. So I don't know how many times we've been in that same situation where we just don't take each other's hand again. We quietly calculate the safety or lack of safety. So, refuse to lie is not just about taxes, and it's not just about customs agents. It's about remembering to open our eyes to those daily indignities, to not become numb to them, to even in that moment where we were fearful to say it out loud, to not make it okay. And so my wife right now is in Vermont. We are expecting a baby boy in any minute now. It's amazing, but one of the things it does is it makes you think about what kind of messages you want to deliver to your child, what kind of role model you want to be. And as we prepared to fill out our first tax form as a married couple, these are the thoughts that infuse our thinking. And I want to teach my son honesty. I want to teach him integrity. I want to teach him to stand up for himself. I want to teach him that he never has to accept anything less than full equality. And I want to show him by our actions that it's important to refuse to lie, even when it's your government compelling you to do so. Thank you very much.